Thank you. Thank you, everyone. As Colleen said, I'm Kimberly Bradley, the Conversations Curator. And this panel is one that's quite dear to my heart for a number of reasons. I do think public art is at a bit of an inflection point of sorts. You guys can tell us more about this. But we're at a time in which the role and impact of public art is changing dramatically and dynamically. Historically, public art was monumental and decorative, commissioned by governments, religions, or wealthy patrons to forward official narratives. But in the past half century or so, public art has increasingly become a medium for social commentary and community engagement. Contemporary public art often seeks to challenge perceptions, provoke thought on urgent societal issues, bring people together, or remind us of hope and beauty. And it continues to evolve. What this evolution looks like now and could look like in the future is what this panel is about. And I'd like to go a little deeper into the introductions of these distinguished speakers. All the way to my left is Kate Gilbert, as Colleen said, the executive director of the forthcoming and inaugural Boston Public Art Triennial, titled The Exchange, and opening on May 22nd, 2025, and running until October. Kate has long worked with Boston institutions on programming and curating public art projects through the independent organization Now and There, which she founded in 2015. She's also an artist. And here in the middle is photographer, curator, and writer Dr. Deborah Willis, who is the chair of the Department of Photography and Imaging at the Tisch School of Arts of New York University. The founding director of the Center for Black Visual Culture, Deborah is the recipient of MacArthur and Guggenheim Fellowships and the 2022 Don Tyson Prize for the Advancement of American Art. So I'd like to just get right into what you both do in the public art sphere. And I'd like to ask Kate first, how the Boston Public Art Triennial came to be an idea, and now as it's about to launch in spring next year, how all of this came to pass. So could you just describe?
Yes, and I'll try and do this briefly. This could be an entire 45-minute conversation. In summary, it came from frustration. So as an artist with many artist friends in the Boston area, looking around at our visual landscape, I wasn't seeing the kind of contemporary art that folks were making, that's in our institutions. We've got some really strong institutions in Boston. The visual landscape wasn't showing how innovative we are. It wasn't showing representationally who we are as Bostonians. So I just started putting some pieces out. Some of them are here on the screen. And the response from people was, thank you. These are the conversations we want to be having in the art world. We've been doing this for 9 years, and it just felt like the triennial, a moment when we can come together. We're constantly finding and fostering artists. This focus of that intense process of public art, collaborating with multiple institutions, bringing together other organizations from the Children's Museum to the library, it felt like the right moment. And I think we'll probably talk about that more, about why is this the right moment for public art. But it really came out of a frustration watching folks through COVID. We were getting a lot of calls. Public art is great, it's safe, it's accessible, how do we do more of it? So this is the big swing.
Deborah, you have a long-standing artistic practice as a photographer, a long career as a scholar. You've curated and created public artworks yourself and taken part in For Freedoms, which is co-founded by your son, Hank Willis Thomas, one of whose projects is a nationwide billboard campaign, which you can see on this rotating slide deck of pictures. Could you share the thinking behind some of your own public art projects, and then at the end, For Freedoms?
Thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here, just to reconsider the whole concept of public art. And mine is community-based, and it's something I've been thinking about for a while. I've worked with artists within the community of Philadelphia as well as New York City, thinking about how do we retell stories. I meet a lot of artists who are storytellers who want to exchange ideas about their lives. The one project that I worked with the Mural Arts Project, focused on formerly incarcerated men and women and the idea of stigmatizing their image within the community. So I photographed working with one of my former students, Michelle, she interviewed them, I photographed them in their imagined prison clothing, and then how they present themselves today, and created a mural that's on the city in Philadelphia on the 22nd Street. But it's a way of rethinking these stories, and also with ways for me to curate as well, stories specifically about the women and the vote. So here we began to think about, in 2000, it's, and 200 years, can't think of the dates anymore, but we had organized an exhibition with 100 years celebrating the women of the voting. And so we wanted to work with women artists who are thinking about the history of women and voting. And so I worked in that realm. And then also looking at the clothesline as a public space, because I think that women who hang their clothes on clotheslines and their conversations it's an aspect of public art as well, as they begin to create dialogue about their lives.
Could you talk about For Freedoms?
And with For Freedoms, here we are. For Freedoms is a project that Hank Willis Thomas, Eric Gottesman, Wyatt Gallery, and Michelle Wu worked together in thinking and rethinking about how to tell a story about community, about politics, about love, about what's missing in their communities, specifically through histories. There are stories of families who are, we always see billboards and they're selling a product or a lawyer or some sad story, but there's never a billboard that gives us a message about hope or a message about the histories about migration and translation in a sense. So how do we translate those stories within a billboard? And that's the idea that the artists packed, that they decided they wanted to create an experience for artists to give them also work, but also give them an opportunity to create their art in the public realm, not only in museums, but so that taking the art to the communities in their cities wherever throughout the world.
Kate, I'll ask this question of you. How long has this community focus been evolving?
I mean, it is.
You have a lot of this happening.
It is baked in. I think the last two slides goes back to my experience witnessing James Wine's piece in the Hamden Shopping Center where I was growing up as a kid. It has been part of every one of our projects ever since the inception. We will find an artist whose work we believe in and who has a special message within the work, and then bring in community. So we have 11 paid community captains that for the last year have been in each of the neighborhoods where we will be presenting work. And they're giving us direct feedback. Some of them are saying, that's not a good site for that work. Or here's a local, here's the great roti shop that we want to recognize when people are coming to see the work. So it's inherent in our process. I always say we're artists first and community like 1B, right after.
Could you talk also a little bit, Kate, I'll stick with you, about the different forms public art now takes?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing it, these slides. It can be a picnic. It can be the promises that Paul Ramirez-Jonas did. It can be beautiful murals. It can be temporary. It can be permanent. But I do think we are getting away from these one single point of view statement pieces, that we used to see in monuments, memorials, and there's much more of a reciprocity. And in our curation, we always make sure that the work is somehow participatory. And sometimes that can mean just, it's mirrored or there's some sort of I'm seeing myself in the work.
Deb, I'd like to ask you, what do citizens want from public art? You guys are both facilitators, and there are a lot of moving parts to the organization. But one of the big moving parts is how do citizens receive the public art that's happening? Deb, you could answer this one first, perhaps.
I think it's really broad, and there's many perspectives that we could walk through with that question. Specifically, just here we see Love with Robert Indiana. When that was placed in Philadelphia, it shocked the city because people could not understand just LOVE. Why is that a public art piece? But they miss the whole aspect of humanitarian aspect of what it means to love. And so what I am experiencing with art today, public art today, is that there's an engagement. There's way for citizens to talk about parts of their lives that were missing and the way that they want to live, a sense of hope in their lives. When we see the monuments that during the tear down the monuments in different parts of the cities in the South, but we know that there were monuments that were built by black families, black soldiers who were Civil War soldiers. And I think what people in the 19th century wanted, 17th century wanted to honor men, great men. Today, I believe that many of the people in the community are looking for ways to talk about their lives and bring together quilting, workshops, site-specific installations. I'm thinking about South Street Seaport with Rose DiCiano, who takes her work into the community to create stories. And there's an exchange where people can bring their dogs, their cats, their families, and then have a dialogue within the work that they're experiencing in the spaces.
Kate, how does one reach citizens as a public art triennial executive director? How does this outreach happen to know which stories might want to be told?
It starts with listening. These community engagement listening sessions, it starts with understanding its research, knowing who in the community has been there for a long time. And that means going to very diverse sets of organizations and people. I think the city of Boston is doing a very good job right now through the Boston Art Commission of bringing in a community conversation about art. But it does take time, and it's about building trust.
Are there sometimes citizens that you can't reach? How far does the outreach go?
I think there's definitely a self-selecting group that's going to show up. To date, we have found that everyone who's coming to participate wants to see a more open, more vibrant, more equitable city, and they're seeing public art as a way to bring people together in these conversations that Deborah's talking about. Sure, we're not going to hit everyone that's rushing through as a commuter past a public square. But it shows up in, social media is pretty powerful. I mean, we are using this work to help people get away from that and to have live conversations. But we're tracking that through, social media and press and our, info line, and people are vocal.
How does one measure the impact? This is the killer question, isn't it? How does one measure the impact of public art? And I'll stick with you.
Yeah, so there's real quantitative data that we can pull. So, there's this thing, every time you're using your cell phone, you're pinging a tower, and there is anonymized cell phone data that we can use, and people are using this all the time to figure out where a restaurant should be or where, retail. So we can tell, in one of our early projects, we could tell that 1,000 people came to a spot where we had a piece of public art more than had been there in the past. So that's useful to some degree to say, okay, this investment is there. But it's really the storytelling. For the triennial, we'll be giving teens video cameras and some support in making vlogs, basically video blogs. We're going to put their opinions out there, whether they're critical. I mean, they may be critical in positive or negative point of view, but that's the way that we keep evolving this very nascent art form. I mean, as we were talking about, until recently, it was statues made by people in power and with money, right? So the more that we engage in these conversations and listen to their stories, the better the work will be in terms of responding to the public. So yes, it's quantitative, it's qualitative, it's listening, it's being open, it's being willing to bend and shift as the public. And, let's also talk about the art world has strong opinions about public art as well.
I'd like to follow up as well with Photoville. It's a project that's in New York and has expanded to other cities. And they invite every summer or fall a group of 500-600 artists to expand and show their work. in the public in Brooklyn or other parts of the boroughs and in the city, but also the Monument Lab in Philadelphia, the exact same situation. They present work by artists, and they create it in the community, and then there's a community engagement with the work that's involved with making a difference in the terms of the conversations that are developed from the experiences. It's from students as well as from the people from the community.
What were the responses to For Freedoms, the different billboards? And as far as I understand this, there was a 50-state project, billboards in all 50 states of the United States.
And
what was the response?
500 artists, more than 500 artists. And the initial response was trying to find the billboard and trying to find the company to, quote, offer a space for the experience. My husband worked with my son, our son, and his colleagues to find the space. Initially, it was difficult, but there was a sense of trying to understand what an artist's billboard would look like. What stories do you want to tell in 4 words or with one image? And so that it was embraced through the artist's impact. The artist had a story to tell, like how do we place this monument in a billboard as a monument in the city or on the highway. And we know that we drive through and we see billboards throughout our communities. Some are ignored, but then the impact of revisiting it often is something that we know was impactful for the project.
Kate, I'll ask a question that ties into this. What factors come into play in initiating or orchestrating a public art event or piece? There are many, many layers of approval and a lot of players when things are in the built environment.
Strong curation, understanding that there are themes that artists are talking about in their work right now, and with that curation, understanding what a community wants to talk about. No one wants to be the organization sort of parachuting in with like, here, you want elephants, right? It then starts with the artists, making sure that we're finding artists who, I always talk about having like a rigid center but can flex and bend. There are some artists that that's not their thing, and they want to only do this one type of thing. They're not going to be successful in public art, because then we next have layers of community. Permitting agencies. I work with the fire department. I work with the historic preservation department. I work with all of them, and funding. And all of these people have to come together around our central tenet. For us, we want to make Boston a more open city. It has for a long time been closed, socioeconomically, racially, and that's changing, and this kind of work can change that. So it's having that strong, premise, curatorial premise, artists that can work with that, community members who want to be a part, a certain amount of flexibility and willing to have humor and joy in the work. And then funding, and then I'll also add that great question you asked about evaluation, because we take that in a learning mindset, helps us do, the next triennial, the next work, and on and on.
What role does local politics play in this? It's a big question. Tiny question, but a big one. Yeah.
A lot. And, I can only speak to Boston, and Boston has a fantastic mayor, the first female mayor and mayor of color. We have the first openly gay female governor. So, for us, politics is good, right? If they're willing to take risks, they understand that creative endeavors can not only build, greater economic development, but also greater social cohesion and better neighborhoods and stronger families and on and on and on. I imagine trying to do this in a place other than Boston, especially right now, could be a challenge. Our works are controversial. We have 18 artists, 16 locations, projects by indigenous artists, projects by local, international. They're talking about some really political and important topics right now that we need to be having real dialogue about, not just, sort of.
And thinking of, I said on committees in different communities, 110th Street in Harlem subway project. There were a number of artists created work for Malcolm X stop for his image. Some artists created abstract work. Some actually had figurative work. The community could not understand that. How could we agree on abstraction for someone like Malcolm X? But the artists, so that dialogue that happens between the artists, the community, the city, it's, you know, that strange tension that happens within the community of how do we teach people how to read the image, but also how to expand the idea of abstraction in art and storytelling. And it was a true battle, you know, within that experience of how to present Malcolm X in the image.
How exactly does one teach people to read? Through public events?
It's not one way of reading. It's a constant dialogue where arguments develop in a small space. We know that they think that artists are coming in to tell the community how they want, what they want the image to look like, and the artist says, no, we need to tell you how we want to experience this. So it's a constant dialogue, and sometimes we win, and sometimes, you know, it doesn't happen that way.
I just want to add to that. One of the ways that this is a great education sort of program. The reason we have our projects temporary or sort of shorter term, 18 months to 3 years, is because there's this great sort of catch-up that, at least in Boston, we're trying to do around public art. We sort of stopped somewhere in the 60s and 70s with sort of large sort of Beverly Pepper type works. And there are all these things, as you're saying, what is public art? It's a mural, it's a, you know, social space, it can be all these things. So we're trying this, it's almost like an acculturation and here's this, here's that, let's get used to what public art can be. And one of the ways we've found, because, you know, it's in the public, there's only so much signage you can have, people aren't going to really read it all. We have a public art ambassador program, so it's like museum docents, and they're out there, and they're on the front lines, and sometimes they're, you know, showing people where the bathroom is, but they're also trying to come at a relationship of, you know, who are you, why are you here, let's talk about why this work might resonate to you. It's been a really successful program, and in fact, our now assistant curator came through that program, and he was Jasper Sanchez was in the public, and now understands, has that sort of baked into his DNA as a curator, how the public can help educate us and how we can help inform what public art is, especially contemporary art.
In my research, I read a really interesting piece by the critic Seth Rodney, because quite often all these things sound so fantastic, and people like us love to look at public art, and we're here at Art Basel, we can understand it perhaps better than someone who doesn't have the same exposure. But when you talk about some of the objectives that I mentioned in the intro, social engagement, critique, provocation to a certain degree, Seth asks if we sometimes expect too much from public art, that we'd like to engage in. Maybe it doesn't quite have the effect that we would like, or the organizers would like, or the public artists would like. Does public art fulfill expectations? Does it actually change the status quo? I'm being slightly contrarian here, but I would love to get your thoughts on this. And I'll start with Deb.
Yeah, with the 100 Women, 100 Vote project, we used Federal Hall in downtown Wall Street as a project to create banners. The banners to think about the first Asian American woman who was allowed to vote, the experience of a migration of stories to tell within the aspect of women. So women's stories have always been central to my work, and having women's stories in the public is something that I felt was really important or necessary for communities to engage with, especially Wall Street. Nona Faustine is an artist who's working with wearing white shoes. Considering that Wall Street was an auction block for enslaved men and women, and using her nude body to relive that experience and walk the walk of different experiences that women had during this time over 400 years. So what do we want from public art? What does the community want from public art? It's just the education, as Kate mentioned, but this history of how do we reshape our communities and how do we re-educate our children and the government, government officials. There are unknown stories. This is known as Peace Here. And we use the same experience of how, and here is Alison Sarr, who creates a salon and during the Olympics and have an opportunity for people to sit down and around a table to talk about issues. And I think that's really the most important aspect of what I believe people want from public art. They want to engage. Like, what does this mean? That's the question that people will always ask. Well, I don't understand what this means. And then step after step, there we will walk through, and that's the engagement that I've had over time.
It's incremental and not some spectacular moment where the status quo has changed. Kate, would you like to add?
Yeah, I think I go back to that slide of the parking lot. That I was impressioned by that at age 4. It had such an impact on me because I wanted to go crawl around on it, and my mother was talking about Silent Spring. My dad was like, how dare they cover those cars? But it became a vehicle for us to keep talking. I look at the work of, and I agree, public art is a seeded, it's a process of seeding the environment. It's not going to change the world overnight. And I look at the work of Ann Lewis. So she put up a mural in Lower Roxbury of a convicted felon. We worked with women who were in a sort of halfway house, and they decided together the visibility that they wanted to project with Ann was their choice and our choice of how to support prison reform and their choices coming out of this halfway house. The work on the side of the wall was Laura. Under it was the words choice in Ann's signature style. And we just so happened to have Senator Chang Diaz come to the opening. Senator Chang Diaz would drive by that mural every day, and she was working on legislation for prison reform. So she just literally used this as a time clock because it was an 18-month project. And she said, I'm going to have this legislation passed by those 18 months. And sure enough, she did. So that is a way to say, yes, we did. It worked. But that's not always how it's going to be, because that wasn't our intention in making that project. We were supporting an artist and her work and having a public conversation about prison reform. So I think that it also comes back to intention. Ours for the Triennial is about showing Boston in a new light. We're pairing artists with local experts. We're trying to lift up the local expertise, not just, think of Boston, I think many of you will think Harvard and MIT, but we're working with unhoused youth at break time. And they're informing a project that Patrick Martinez is doing, and their works will be in the downtown area. So yes, art can save the world, but I do think public art has a lot on it right now. Maybe unfairly.
Does public art always carry a certain risk?
Yes.
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 Maybe that's the answer to that question. What happens, here's the tricky question, what happens when public art does evoke controversy, criticism, or resistance? And I think you might want to talk about your son Hank's Embrace, which is a slide coming through.
Mm-hmm. The Embrace in Boston was an amazing experience when Hank was developing the idea of working with mass design, that they engaged in a discussion about how to tell a story with a couple, Coretta Scott King and Martin Luther King. Here's the image. Hank saw the photograph of the couple hugging, embracing, but he said that he felt that Mrs. King was holding him up. That embrace was celebrating his honor. And when Hank decided to create it without their heads, shocked a number of people. But the idea of how do we embrace, here's Hank again, love overrules, that the idea of the embrace meant to lift up, but also to hold on to a community. That's where they met and fell in love in Boston. There are other stories, but within the opening week, it was this beautiful love experience. And then when the people who, of course, who did not know how to read an image or read the experience, had difficulties understanding why are their heads missing. And then a comedian decided to take it further by seeing something that was really rude and difficult that no one else could imagine seeing in the image, in this wonderful sculpture. And it had a lot of news, CNN, all over the country and the world. And then it gave Hank an opportunity. Of course, I was offended and wanted to talk about it, of course, to other people in the classroom. But the experience for the public to learn how to sit back and be educated by an artist, was difficult for them to understand. And I really believe that artists are our educators. They are also our historians and our researchers, and which really develops in different ways. And that's the exchange that Hank had in the public. The public had an opportunity because the Boston public, the people that I met from the Embrace Project, the people who built the actual, the hug, the Embrace in Seattle, or Portland rather, they also were a part of it. So there was a community of people who actually built this piece and engaged in it over years of discussions and it was a difficult time to imagine that no one could see the opposite of what we all see, that we couldn't imagine that someone could see something as beautiful as something difficult as they could imagine.
About how long did it take to die down, the initial controversy?
Within months, it didn't stay long. I don't know, I would say 3 months maybe.
Probably, yeah. In Boston, no one saw that. No one experienced that. And that goes back to, there were years of planning before Hank was even brought in as the artist. So I went to a community listening session, community sort of gathering where we were having those sort of educative conversations about what is public art. And people were like, we need representational sculpture. We don't understand abstraction, and so then there was like, well, this is abstraction, this is why this, and there was, by the time this work came along, Boston was ready, and we had already had these conversations about why is it in the common and not where the Kings were practicing, why is it isn't in the neighborhood. So we had that dialogue that, the general public outside of Boston hadn't had yet. And I think for us, as we think about the triennial, we're watching closely that. We're watching closely, the MFA just put out a new piece for the triennial by Alan Michelson. And I think it comes down to, we have to help people access the work in a way that is, the artists created it. Conversations like this, I would love to see expanded out a little bit further to more diverse audiences.
One even remembers the Eiffel Tower was not at all accepted early on, and many pieces of public art have come to be beloved in whatever communities that they're in. I mean, Eiffel Tower goes way beyond Paris. I would like to start heading into some speculation. The title of this panel is What Can Public Art Do? But I'd like to ask Deb first, what do you think it should do going forward?
Going forward, I believe as I have this sense of hope that this aspect of education and continue, that I believe that public art will continue to hold the vision of the artists in history, giving them an opportunity to show that there are multiple stories to tell in this country. We only, of course, growing up, we have only heard the one story. But now there's so many beautiful stories that need to be reimagined, to be held onto. And what happens within the classroom of young people today, we need to begin to let young people have hope again. And I think that's something that I want public art to consider. What do we have, like with the Embrace? There are names of individuals who were part of the history, activists in Boston that many of us are unknown to history, but their names are now, etched onto the ground. And I think that public art, it's important for public art to recall and hold on to some of these names. The young people and older people and civic leaders began to understand who these people are and why these communities changed within Boston, within Philadelphia, within New York, is because of an artist project.
And it's outside of a museum, which often it represents some sort of zone that is, not everybody goes to museums. Mm-hmm. Kate, I'd like to ask you also, do you see public art happening more, not just in Boston, but with different organizations across the country? Where is it especially active? Are there other people like you throughout the U.S.?
This is happening across the globe, and what I hope public art continues to do is that it stays very local to where it is. What we're doing in Boston is one thing that I don't think you can just pick up and take over to Minneapolis, for instance. So I hope public art stays true to being site or context specific. I hope that also artists and practitioners and organizations that are creating public art are better respected in the art world. It still does feel like that thing that, because it can't be commodified, because it can't be collected, it's not necessarily as well respected. Public artists and the organizations that create them are very risk tolerant and are putting out messages of hope, of joy. I agree. I think I'm worried about technology's impact on us. I'm worried that we are not talking to each other anymore. I'm guilty. I'm looking at my phone, walking around. I don't see the world anymore. So I hope public art can bring us back to first ourselves, and our own sort of agency, and then to see each other in public space and understand that we're in this together. And to respect the artists' visions. Nicholas Galinan, for instance, is one of the artists in the Triennial. He's got that great piece out on the beach right now. How do we come together around a topic like that? What are we going to burn down? What are we going to build? How are we rebuilding? So I know I'm putting a lot of expectation and hope on public art, but I do believe that it can do a lot for us.
Well, it creates focal points. It creates meeting places. Mm-hmm. My own little hometown, which is in Minnesota, had a really derelict downtown, like many small towns do, and local artists, about 20 sculptures were set up about a decade ago, and the entire downtown is enlivened. There are new restaurants. And I see this also happening across rural America. Kate, I'm borrowing a question from you, or a little idea from you. Mm-hmm. Your idea of dreams, like what's the dream project, is something you said you always ask yourself, or anybody you hire.
Yeah.
What would be your dream public art project and why?
That's a great question, and that is how I approach a studio artist. What's the dream? What have you always want to do? What's that big thing? For me, we're attempting it right now. It is a citywide, completely free public art event where there are hundreds of associated events where people can come together in safe spaces and have really difficult conversations. The dream is that continues. It's really as simple as that we can highlight visual artists, performing artists, along with cultural institutions and individuals that are knitting our city together. It's a simple dream, right?
Deb.
Yeah, that's very similar. My dream project is very similar to Alison Saar's piece that was at the Olympics, the salon. I love the idea. She says that Gertrude Stein, the concept came from a Gertrude Stein moment. I always think of the salons that writers had over time, and the opportunity to have a public salon, to talk, to have an engagement. And that's what I'd like public art to experience in the future, to have an opportunity to educate. And that's part of what I feel is really important in my work, as well as the work of artists working today.
Could you talk a little bit more about something we talked about at breakfast, though, your idea of beauty and spreading love and beauty through public art?
That's, I thought you talked about me being a middle child.
Yeah. I promised you I wouldn't say that on stage, but
Right.
she's in the middle seat.
But that's one project that I've spent over 20 years creating a course. It's called The Black Body and the Lens, and how do we understand the female body, and how do we identify beauty and experience beauty in art, and not pretty, but this, evoking a sense of hope and love and joy. What the piece that Alison Saar has, there's a sense of rest that we all need. I mean, there's a lot of turmoil in the world, and how do we find a space to find beautiful conversations and difficult conversations? And what I've noticed with artists working today, that they are also looking at cross-culturally and cross-disciplines to find stories to tell through art making. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's a beautiful way for this interwoven experience of us working together as quilt makers, in a sense, but also quilting our stories together and creating beautiful stories. And that's something that I see, I envision, and continue to believe that it will work. Mm-hmm.
I think we could wind down on this hopeful note. Considering how the world is today, I think we need exactly this. Mm-hmm. I'm sure there'll be obstacles or bumps in the road in making these things happen. But I think in many ways, looking for beauty and creating community through these projects that both of you are working on answers some of the questions that we have in society today, or makes things smoother, tells old stories. I would like to just point out that Deb has an exhibition. You're in a booth, Wellencora Gallery?
Wellencora Gallery in the Nova section in 9. I'm working, also looking historically at images from the past, but also bringing it to the future in storytelling of women and men who survived Civil War experiences, but also how to retell it today through a performance and dance.
And at the Art Basel shop, the book For Freedoms, Where Are We Now, launched just before this panel, but is still available. So please go have a look at all of the Billboard. The Billboard project is included. Kate, all the best for the launch of the Boston Public Art Triennial, May 22nd.
May 22nd through October 31st. Yes.
And we're all looking forward to seeing all of the different participatory projects, all these things. I'd like to thank the audience. And let's give the speakers a big round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you.